So I suppose what I want to do in the next 2 hours we have, isn't that right, Barry? No, 30 minutes. Don't worry, you only have to put up with me for 30 minutes. But what we want to do is we want to talk about, and you're going to love this, and I don't want to sigh, cloud. Anyone fed up talking about cloud? Give me a show of hands. Be honest. Okay. So what we want to try and do is make this a little bit real. I want to talk about hybrid cloud. I want to talk about, probably more importantly, customer experiences than my experience, but want to talk about how we feel about hybrid cloud. And from a Dell Technologies point of view, looking at this holistically, whether it's AWS, whether it's Azure, whether it's IBM, whether it's Google, whether it's VirtuStream. So we have a viewpoint on all of these things. I'm not expecting you to agree with everything I'm going to say, for some strange reason. God, this is a really tough audience. I'm loving this. This is good. This is going to be an interactive session. Now, just in case you weren't sure where I'm from, I thought I'd put a picture of a server on the very first screen. Is that okay? Does everyone feel it's like a Dell presentation now? Yeah. Okay. We have a server. And really what I want to talk about, as I said, is hybrid cloud, but specifically cloud and intelligent edge. What do we mean by intelligent edge? What do we mean? I suppose, is it fair to say all of us are hearing IoT, AI, big data, infrastructure as code, service fabric, all of this goodness all the time? Let me ask a very simple question. On AWS, and for that matter, Azure, what's the 3 top workloads? And then there was silence. What's the 3 top workloads? So, would anyone think it's AI? Anyone give me a show of hands for AI in the top 3? Big data. Okay, couple of hands. Anyone think it's DevOps? Yeah, couple of hands. You're all wrong. It's VMs, VMs, VMs. Lift and shift up. And one of the things that we're seeing is that if you lift and shift and don't understand the workload, unfortunately, you end up bringing it back. So we'll get into that. So a couple of things. Everyone familiar with the NIST definition of what a cloud is? Yeah, that really clears it up. So not everybody's hybrid cloud is the same. Not everybody's opinion about multi-cloud is the same. Let me try and bring you through some hopefully practical examples. If I think about what Mark Benefit says, or even Michael Dell, cloud is not a place, it's a way of working. We all want to optimize the hardware. We all want to have potentially the ability to automate. We all potentially want self-service to some extent. All of those things shouldn't force us to go to a particular place. And hopefully one thing you'll agree with me is you as a customer should choose where you want to run the workload. Does everybody agree with that? You should be able to choose where you want to run the workload, whether it's a legacy workload or whether it's a cloud-native workload. Everyone familiar with the term bimodal IT? How many of us have heard of the term bimodal IT? Okay, where have the rest of us been? Bimodal IT is a terrible term because it means working one way in the public cloud and working another way on-premise. We need to stop doing that. We need to figure out ways, or at least vendors need to provide solutions that allow you to work the same way on-premise as in the public cloud. And really, that's what this is about. Now, would anyone disagree with this? Proceed with caution. Okay. Now, why do I say that? Well, if we kind of jump into it, this is an IDC survey that was done about 3,500 enterprise customers worldwide. I think it was in February, March this year. And the CIOs were asked a couple of questions, one in particular. Are you engaged in offboarding any workload from the public cloud? Not are you thinking about, are you considering, are you actively engaged? 80% came back and said, yes, one or more workloads are being taken off the public cloud. Now, does that mean the public cloud is a bad place? No, I'm an Azure architect. I'm also formerly a Red Hat guy and all of that goodness, worked with OpenStack in a dim, dark past. So I love cloud. I think cloud, as in public cloud, is great. But I do have a kind of a fundamental thing on this. You know, most of us have rented a car for work or for holiday. But if we're in the same place, we don't rent that car every week. We purchase it, or we lease it, or we do something with it. So public cloud makes huge sense when I have a workload that isn't always on, or when I have a workload that I can turn on and off, or when I want to burst. But what we're seeing, and really this IDC survey bears it out, and I think if you talk to Microsoft, particularly Satya, it is a hybrid world. In other words, you should have choice where you put the workload, and if that workload is 24/7 and always on, it may not make sense to run it in the public cloud. Now, if I'm 5 or 6 people as a startup, I should never buy a server, ever. I've just written my own P45 by saying you should never buy a server. I'm from Dell Technologies. What I'm saying, just for clarity, before Michael Dell hears about this, is if you're 5 people or a startup, a very small startup, you probably don't need a server. But life is a bit more complex than that. So, I suppose a couple of things. You know, this is true. There is many dimensions. This is not straightforward. Guys, does anyone remember when firewalls were first introduced? Don't be afraid to identify yourself. Okay, that puts you at a certain age group. I'm not going to say what it is for everyone else in the room. But do we remember there was a lot of hype around firewalls, and they were saying, once you have a firewall, your security is sorted? And, you know, I can remember times, even from a Dell EMC point of view, when we said, Equilogic is the answer, now what's the question? Replace that with whatever the new product is, now what's the question? We need to go away from that. We need to understand the workload. Collectively, we need to understand that. The good news for me is the skills that we've built up from a data center point of view, from an infrastructure point of view, from a security perspective, from an operational perspective. It doesn't matter what the latest buzzword is, those skills don't go away. Those skills are as important today as they were in the past. I had a particular customer in London about a year ago, and we sat down with their infrastructure team. And we discovered that there was 200K worth of Azure consumption outside of the control of the IT team that the IT team had just found out about. And the team were saying to me, but Mark, you know, we're being told we don't have a role to play in this. And I turned around and said, well, they're absolutely wrong, because what about the network? What about the security? What about the connectivity? What about understanding it from an operational point of view and providing the disaster recovery and HA? Microsoft is not going to provide that for you, or Amazon is not going to provide that for you. You as an IT team are going to put that together. So if I kind of move off on that, so what is the largest data center challenge facing companies, in our opinion? And it really is considering, and I wouldn't say developing, I would say considering a multi-cloud strategy, because there's risk with multi-cloud. Complexity is one thing. So if I have AWS and I have Azure and I have Google and I have whatever, there's always risk. But equally, all of us are concerned about vendor lock-in of some kind. So we need to be careful about that. You know, from a Dell Technologies point of view, we're very proud of the fact that Pivotal is part of what we do. So from a developer's perspective, we can develop independently of the cloud, or even for that matter, on-premise. So I can use my Pivotal Cloud Foundry to create an environment, and I can put it anywhere. But it doesn't have to be Pivotal. It could be OpenShift. It could be Jenkins, open source, whatever it might be. But what we're really looking at here is how do we make that application independent of a particular platform. Gartner, and I don't know how many people hold stock with Gartner, but Gartner have said by 2020, over 50% of applications will be developed, not purchased. And says you, which companies were they talking to? That's an interesting one. But I would argue, even if that's a bit aggressive, we'll certainly see 20 to 30% of applications in the future being developed in-house to suit what we're trying to do. Now, a couple of things. One thing we tend to forget when we get excited about technology, and I think all of us are guilty of this is about people. This is about process. This is about understanding if that particular solution, whether it be AWS, whether it be Azure, whether it be Azure Stack, whether it be VxRail, whatever it is, if that fits with my approach. How many people have heard, usually from senior management, we have a cloud-first strategy? Anyone heard that term? So the next time someone says that to me, and it's going to be a career-limiting move, I am going to say, what the hell are you talking about? Because cloud isn't a place. What people want from cloud, or what they're excited about, is the automation, is the self-service, is the scale up, scale down, is the OpEx potentially versus the CapEx. Can we do that intelligently today? A lot of us in this room have been doing this for a number of years already, whether our data's in someone else's data center or not. That's the point. We need to keep the eye, I think, and I'm not preaching, but I think we need to keep the eye on the ball from that perspective. Now, you know, kind of moving on from that, you know, if we talk about IaaS, how many of us have implemented IaaS in their environment? Infrastructure as a service. Okay? And it's funny, I talked to an audience in Ireland and I said, how many people have implemented IaaS? And everyone put up their hand. And I said, please put down your hand if you just have virtualization, because that's not IaaS. Infrastructure as a service means that you have automation, means that you have self-service, means that you have chargeback or showback, and so on. Now, I don't always need IaaS, but it can make sense. But the key piece is, if I try and run IaaS, just VMs in a public cloud, whatever it is, you will pay a lot more than running it on-premise. Shadow of a doubt. No way, no how. However, if we talk about PaaS and SaaS, and we'll get to that in a second. So if I jump on, because I don't want to preach too much. So what is Dell Technologies' cloud strategy? And it's very simple. And you really are lucky that I'm not doing this on a whiteboard, because my drawings are atrocious. Okay, really, really, really bad. I did one of those glass boards with Disruptive. And from my perspective, what was very interesting was you couldn't make out my drawings. Anyway, so if we talk about off-prem and on-prem, and everyone's familiar with traditional applications, predominantly running client-server, predominantly we're talking about running on-prem. Cloud-native, great advantages because we have that whole idea. If we talk about something like Netflix, the speed of development, the ability to make changes rapidly. The problem is, if I want to run traditional, I tend to have to run it on-premise. If I want to run cloud-native, I tend to have to run it in someone's cloud. So if I build it out, really what we're saying the future should be that traditional or cloud-native applications should run where you want them to run. Okay? So how do we achieve that? Well, there's a number of ways of doing it. And I want everybody to look at this and tell me. So I want to say something. This is what's known as the Dell Technologies Value Pyramid. I know it looks like a triangle, but it's a pyramid. Does everybody get that? So if you're talking to Michael Dell or any of the leadership, This is a Dell Technologies value pyramid. Everyone got that? More importantly, what's at the top of the pyramid? The application, the workload. As excited as I used to get by servers and software and everything else, it's all about the application. So how do we drive down the cost of infrastructure? How do we actually do it? Well, one of the ways of doing it is to look at hyperconvergence. In other words, the ability to run, for example, VMware using vSAN, or running Microsoft using storage spaces direct, where we can have compute, network, and storage in the same unit. Now, does that make sense for every workload? Of course not. But for the vast majority of general purpose workloads, even SQL, that can make huge sense. And guess what? It drives out complexity. That's what Amazon do. That's what Microsoft do. They drive out complexity in the hardware. So if we kind of move on, because I'm kind of conscious of time, it is about optimizing that infrastructure as a service. So I spent 2 years working on Azure Stack for Dell EMC, having previously worked for Microsoft and the previous iteration of Azure Stack. And those of you who are not familiar, Azure Stack is an on-premise solution. It is Azure inside your data center. But what's really interesting is a lot of people would say, yeah, well, Microsoft would do that because they're not a cloud-native company. But what's interesting, if you've seen the recent announcements from AWS, AWS Outpost is the ability to run AWS on-premise. Now, if AWS are saying it's a hybrid world, and Microsoft are saying it's a hybrid world, and everybody else is saying it's a hybrid world, maybe finally the industry knows what everybody else in this room knows. It's complicated. That's kind of where we're going. So if I kind of jump along, this is really interesting, but I want to move a little bit further into this. So a couple of things. Anyone familiar with any of those services? This is a fantastic audience. Really interactive. I'm loving your work, guys. So is everybody clear that down across the bottom layer is IaaS, infrastructure as a service, compute, network, and storage? We have been doing that, or at least getting towards that, for 15 years. Really, when we talk about AWS Outpost or Azure Stack, as in this case, we're talking about taking those PaaS services, taking Service Bus, taking IoT, taking big data on-premise. In other words, starting to realize the promise of being able to run the workload anywhere. Make sense? So if I kind of drill into it, just in case you were upset that there wasn't enough pictures of servers, that's what an Azure Stack looks like, a VX Rack AS from Dell EMC. And what's quite interesting is that it's hyper-converged because it drives out complexity. It can be scaled by the server, which is also interesting. In other words, scale. It includes automation, orchestration, self-service, multi-tenancy, all of those things that some of us have spent years building in an environment. It's there. Now, I am going to pretend that you install it and everything is done. That would be lies. There's obviously a lot of work and understanding. And this is really a solution for someone that has an Azure direction. If I'm trying to run IaaS and I want to run that efficiently, I should really be doing that on a VxRail or a VxRack or vSAN ready nodes, if VMware is my direction of travel. If Microsoft is my direction of travel, I should be looking at the same hyperconvergence, looks exactly the same as this, but obviously a lot less expensive with storage spaces direct because I don't have the Azure fabric on top. So if I jump along, and I know I'm nearly there on time, this is about where it makes sense, providing an appliance. In other words, it's installed in 5 days, it's connected to your network, and it's just another Azure location. So as we know, we have 2 Azure locations in the UK. This becomes your own Azure data center. Now, that's not trivial. An Azure cluster is 3,500 servers. This starts at 4, so a little bit different. But the point is the APIs are the same. The interface is the same. The PowerShell is the same. If I have an application that was developed in Azure and I can't use it because the data is sensitive, guess what? I can use something like this. But what's really exciting to me about Azure Stack is not that it's a Microsoft solution, but I think it's driving partially the industry towards solutions like AWS Outpost. Because for AWS to turn around and provide an on-premise instance of AWS would have been unthinkable even 3 years ago. Unthinkable. If I said to you 3 years ago, AWS are going to provide a packaged on-premise solution that will run S3, you would say you're a laughing, Mark. You're out of your mind. So something like Azure Stack is interesting because I think it's driving us forward. So to kind of finish out on that a little bit, what's the value from Dell EMC's point of view? Why do customers talk to us? We're not Microsoft. Well, I think what's interesting is we have a unique perspective across the industry. We should have, because we've been in the data center business for over 20 years. And if I have a look at this, this is obviously Azure Stack, but that's not what I'm interested in. What I'm interested in is how does this work for a customer? So this is a combination of Azure Stack to provide the automation and everything else, but Isilon, which is a NAS to provide the unstructured data and the file system that people need. And then on top of that, the SQL is running on storage spaces direct nodes because you're not paying for the consumption. Now, why should you care about that? And I don't really have time to go into it, but what's interesting is that it allows us to look at what the direction is, whether that's VMware, whether that's Microsoft, whether it's open source. It doesn't really matter. It's what works for you. Now, to finish very much, take a look at, this is all public, KPMG Norway, if you look it up. And what they've done is they've implemented audit as a service, financial services company. And as you know, most financial services company accountants are quite conservative. But what these guys did, which was very interesting with ourselves, is they came to us with a partner and said, we want to do audit as a service. And I said, oh, you want to audit someone every year or every 6 months? No, Mark, you don't understand. We want to audit every hour or every day a particular company. I said, what do you mean? Well, a pharmaceutical company, before they prepare for an audit, want to know immediately where they stand. Now, that uses AI, that uses machine learning, that uses unstructured data, that also runs a huge amount of SQL. These are all disparate workloads that don't make sense to be on one platform, hence why we engineered combining Isilon with Azure Stack, with either vSAN or, in this case, Microsoft Storage Spaces Direct. And the point is we took all of those items off the shelf as ready solutions or ready nodes or appliances. In other words, we cut the approach from years of looking at this to months. That's really where we're going. So thank you for listening. And I'm going to wrap up. I was going to take one quick question, if anyone had a question, and then just keep quiet. Any questions, guys? Not including when is he going to stop, please.
So if I look at somebody like iRobot,
yes.
run on Lambda,
yes.
they have 23 million robots in the wild. These are all the vacuum cleaners. And their entire IT estate is run by 10 people. That's 8 developers and 2 operations. And their total IT spending a month is $15,000. So that roughly works out as 1 cent per 20 robots in the field.
Phenomenal.
What do I get for 1 cent with this?
So it's a really good question. And what you're saying is absolutely correct. If I have a specific use case, should I use public cloud? And is there massive economies of scale if I'm developing cloud native? Absolutely. But equally, what this is about is allowing you to put the data where it needs to be. So I'll answer your question in a very quick way. We've all heard the term intelligent edge. Yes? We've all heard about IoT and running IoT in the cloud, and that's essentially what you're talking about. Just think about it for a second, guys. What the intelligent edge, in most cases, is actually a server. If I have, for example, 50 lathes in a factory, And if the temperature goes over a certain amount, that can cause damage to the lathe and possibly fire. If I run that IoT in the cloud, to answer your question in public cloud, the latency is too much. I need to run that intelligently on premise, but I also, to your point, need to run it cloud natively. In other words, be able to develop really quickly as opposed to the old way. So it isn't about cost. What it is about is putting the workload where it needs to be. And you're right. If I take something that should inherently be on the public cloud and put it on premise, it probably will be more expensive. Thanks very much, guys. Thank you.